This video has been brought to you by Squarespace. Hello, my name is Lee Speaks. As in first name Lee, last name Speaks, that is the name on my birth certificate and you can't prove that it isn't. And I love a dress-up game. Even games that aren't strictly dress-up games, if there's a robust dress-up mechanic, that immediately becomes like 80% of the enjoyment for me. For example, I may feel kind of sore at the way that Animal Crossing New Horizons felt incomplete at release and still feels incomplete as of its final update, but you will absolutely never hear me talking bad about its absolutely perfect dress-up mechanic, which is a huge improvement over the previous titles in the series. Or for an opposite example, The Sims 4 will always be worse than The Sims 3 for me because they took away your ability to customize the granular details of the outfit, which is a sin and a crime. As you may have already guessed, I spent a lot of time on Flash dress-up games, particularly the ones hosted on GirlsGoGames and as I got older, Doll Divine. And frankly, I'm concerned that this type of game is a bit of a dying art form. You can claim that Picrew has risen to take their place, but I also feel that Picrew, with its rigid interface and boxy, standardized, and mildly unintuitive UI, isn't really an adequate replacement for the stuff made during the golden age of Flash gaming. No matter how far you stretch the limits of Picrew's character creator, you're still never going to arrive at the level of customizability that you'd see in these more advanced Flash doll makers. So today, I would like to try to give some of the respect that I believe is due for this genre of game in what will hopefully be the first of a series, beginning with GirlsGoGames' unique shopping-based dress-up series, the Shopaholic Games. But first, I've just got to talk about websites. So you probably already know about Squarespace's easy and user-friendly website building system that makes it simple for even people with zero web design experience to build their own beautiful, bespoke website. But did you know that it also makes it easy to get a unique and memorable domain name too? Of course, you can get all those standard top-level domains, .com, .net, .org, but what if you want to get a little fun and funky with it? You could also get .dance, .cool, .dog, .fail. Get yourself ready for Pride Month with .gay, or profess your love for your awesome website with .rocks. Or what if you already have a domain purchased from a different provider, but it's just sitting unused because their website builder wasn't up to snuff? No worries, it's easy to transfer a pre-existing domain to Squarespace, so you can get started with their highly customizable templates that you can change up so much that it doesn't even have to look like you're using a template at all when you're done. I made LeeSpeaks.com to host some cool things that I care about, like how to play Flash games, a list of virtual worlds that still exist, and a link to download Flashpoint Archive, because everybody needs to download Flashpoint Archive. To reserve your own personalized space on the web, head to squarespace.com/LeeSpeaks for 10% off your first website or domain with code LeeSpeaks. GirlsGoGames had a humble beginning as a simple Flash aggregator with astoundingly effective SEO, and this would have their parent company Spil Games executives wondering how they could keep this fire burning. When I think of the history of GirlsGoGames, I tend to sort the timeline into 4 arbitrary phases. There's Phase 1, or the initial phase from 2007 to late 2010, Phase 2, or the social media phase from late 2010 to around 2014, Phase 3, or the Elsagate decay phase from around 2014 to 2019, and Phase 4, or the post-Flash and post-social media phase from 2020 to the present. The debut release of the games I'm going to be covering today represent part of the transition from Phase 1 to Phase 2, with its final release occurring in 2015 or early Phase 3. The most obvious shift that marked the change from the initial phase to that social media phase is, as the name implies, GirlsGoGames suddenly became a website that you can log into. Not only that, but now you could directly interact with other users by adding them to your friends list, commenting on their profiles, and even commenting on the individual games pages. The social media phase is largely regarded as the most fondly remembered era of GirlsGoGames, but it was definitely not without its flaws. Any introduction of social aspects on a website that mostly caters to children opens the door for toxicity and potential inappropriate interaction, and this change came with both of them in spades. GirlsGoGames' social aspects had less than thorough moderation. Of course, there were some auto-filters in place to prevent users from using inappropriate language, but it was easy enough to circumvent. One example that's still stuck in my mind after all these years was this skiing-themed dress-up game where you could make the girl Barbie doll naked, and the comments were just a complete cesspool. It was a chaotic mix of commenters lusting after the dress-up doll and making open invitations for cybering, and other commenters being offended and horrified both by the game and the other comments. I did try to find this game, but was unsuccessful, and it wouldn't really have mattered if I did, because the comments weren't hard-coded onto the page, and so now just display a loading error in the Wayback Machine captures. So the addition of a comment section may have been a net negative for the website, but other additions made in the social media phase weren't nearly as problematic, one of these things being the daily games. Around this time, Spil Games was employing an interesting trick to compel players to return every day by releasing dozens of games that gave you a limited amount of gameplay per day, which you would need to return to on a daily basis to make progress. These daily games were mostly sorted into the quiz section and acted as a kind of horoscope generator. Many of these games, like Animals in the City and Outfits Today, had you selecting between two images based on which one appealed to you more. For Animals in the City, this will generate a critter that's meant to represent you on that day. I guess I'm a candy-loving pony, whatever that means. And Outfits Today generated an outfit vibe that you could hypothetically model that day's outfit after. The majority of these games didn't actually elaborate on what these results actually meant. Really, both the quiz and the results were just fully vibes-based. A few of these games were a bit more involved and had you make something to generate your result instead of just choosing between pictures. Daily Cup of Joe was one of these. While it gives you a similarly vague result as the picture clicker quizzes, to arrive at that result the game has you build a cup of coffee, a bit like a cooking game in quiz form. The most popular of all of these daily quiz games was Professor Purse, where you design a purse and fill it with items to get your result. And this actually gives you a written explanation, unlike most of these. Motherhood is the most important role in your life? That's a miss. Besides the ones with the more involved quiz sections, these games were largely not all that compelling. However, there was something extremely effective about this daily gimmick. Eventually, it becomes more about unlocking all of the possible results than actually responding in accordance to how you feel, which I would argue is a more fulfilling gameplay strategy than just getting the same vague results over and over. Spil was clearly onto something with this daily strategy, so why not push it a few steps further with some more advanced and varied gameplay, giving the user more control over the outcome, and removing that restriction of only being able to play for a couple minutes once a day. Fashion, shopping, and everything glam. These were the ingredients chosen to make the perfect dress-up game. But Spil Games accidentally added an extra ingredient to the concoction: a daily allowance. Thus, the Shopaholic Games were born, using their ultra-high-limit credit cards. Gwen, Grace, and Gabriella have dedicated their lives to buying clothes, and shoes, and accessories. You get it. Since there's no official record for what order these games were released, I'm going to be approximating their release date based on their first appearance in the Internet Archive. So let's take a look at these one by one, more or less in order, beginning with Shopaholic Paris from September 2010. As the first entry in this series, Shopaholic Paris is both the most fundamental and the most simple. It has a small amount of stores and features in comparison to the other games, but would also introduce a lot of staples that would be recycled throughout the series. The gameplay loop that's established in this first game is that you receive $400 in the beginning, and then what seems to be a randomized allowance at the start of each new day, and you can spend that at any of the shops along this street. Sometimes money bags will spawn on the road and you can click those for a little bonus cash, but I believe it only allows you to get so many per day. The shops in this first game are Hair and Happiness, this game's only option for hairstyles, Glitz and Glam, a jewelry store, Shoe Woo for shoes and bags, High Heels and More for high heels, and, you'll never guess this one, more. Punk in Paris and Crazy Topic to cater to the emo and scene crowds, French Kiss and Pineapple for basics, and then M&V and Belle for more designer-looking options. I always lean towards the more alternative and edgy options, personally. Without a doubt, the worst part of this game is the extremely limiting item inventory. You can only have 30 items in your closet before you have to start selling them off to make room, which really puts a damper on your sense of progression. Also, I used to think that the clothing items swapped out every day, but trust me, at least in this game, they don't. I checked the assets. Each store only has 6 associated clothing items in 4 different colors that never switch out. This game's dress-up system is also a bit clunky, making you flip through this book of all the items you purchased in order with no way to filter by type. Once you make your outfit, you could take a picture of it and set it as your GirlsGoGames player avatar or upload it to your game album, which are features that no longer work after the discontinuation of GirlsGoGames social media features. This game looks slightly different depending on where you're sourcing the Flash file. The Flashpoint version has the original title screen, but this one that I found on the Internet Archive has a new and, in my opinion, worse look. The two versions of the game are identical other than that. I wouldn't really recommend running this game with Ruffle. It mostly works, but the dress-up is a little bit broken. Shopaholic Paris was a promising start to the series, but failed to realize the full potential of the concept in the way that the later entries would. In classic Spil Games fashion, Shopaholic Paris got a quick holiday reskin for the second game in the series, Shopaholic Christmas from November 2010. This one's mostly identical with a couple Christmas-themed additions. The Christmas decoration store gives you a couple items to sit next to your avatar. There's Christmas Pet with the options being small reindeer, large reindeer, human person, snowman, Santa Claus, and festive goblin. It just makes sense. There's Happy Bell with some formal wear that doesn't appear in the first game, and finally Season Tops, which is mostly accessories with a couple extra hair options. Clothing options in this game aren't one-to-one with Shopaholic Paris. There are a couple new items here, and some of the pre-existing options have been shuffled around, making the themes of the store slightly incoherent. This game seems to have a consistent allowance of $500 per day. I'm guessing they took away the variability in this one because the Christmas game's peak playability window really only lasts about 1 month. Next entry in this series is Shopaholic Hawaii from July 2011. This one builds substantially on the original entry and introduces a few new gameplay mechanics that would become staples of the series. The first of these are outfit challenges that encourage you to style a look using a specific item, which in this game is just a suggestion and doesn't provide any clear reward. The second new mechanic are jobs, which you can do once per day to get a little extra money. This game introduced a bunch of new shops. Aloha Accessory with a selection of tropical items, Beauty Resort which introduces makeup as an item type, Bikini Mini for swimsuits, Devilish Hairdresser for Yuri, more hairstyles, Floral Flip-Flops for sandals, Kawaii Beach for summery casual wear, Muchi as another designer-like option, and then there's Herb. What? Herb? What the hell is Herb? Oh, Surf! How does Oh Surf get turned into Herb? Jokes aside, these games don't have credits, but Spil Games typically outsourced their development to Chinese game studios, and I think this more than likely happened due to a lack of familiarity with cursive English letters. Anyway, Herb sells sportswear. Then there's Boardorama for non-clothing equipables, and then the job options, a burger restaurant, an ice cream stand, and a lifeguard. The last new shop is called Fortune Fashion, which gives you a secret item that can't be found in any of the other stores, but you won't know what it is until you buy it. There's still a Punk in Paris here, which makes less sense considering the setting. Hawaii has way more inventory slots than Paris did. It doesn't specify, but it has to be at least 100, and now the items are actually sorted into categories, which makes the dress-up way smoother. Another quality of life improvement is that the street loops now instead of forcing you to turn around when you get to the end. With this game, I think the Shopaholic series has hit its stride. None of the major complaints that I had with Paris exist in this game. The selection of items is way more broad, and it just feels generally more complete than Paris did. Although the 100-ish item limit is a bit frustrating for players who'd prefer to collect all the available items, it's a way more workable amount than the insanely small 30-item limit, and is therefore more rewarding to play for an extended period of time. All in all, Shopaholic Hawaii does exactly what it needs to for a game of this concept and within the limitations of its free-to-play Flash format, and is enjoyable to play both for its target audience and people who are returning many years later. Next up, my personal favorite, Shopaholic New York from October 2011. As far as what actually sets it apart from the Hawaii game, I think I just like the general aesthetic better, and the fact that this one skews a little more heavily towards formal wear than the very beachy selection that you see in the Hawaii game. The new shops introduced in this game are Felice First Avenue and Laguna, which both have more formal, designer-looking options. There's Susan's Secrets, which resemble the kind of athleisure that you could get at Victoria's Secret Pink. Mimi Shoe, they're really going crazy with the McDonald's type brands in this one, which stock shoes and accessories, and a pet shop. This game's equivalent of Fortune Fashion is the Daily Wheel of Fashion Fortune. Instead of having mystery boxes, in this game you can spin a wheel to unlock a unique item, and you can make the choice on whether or not to buy it. Another new store in this game is the t-shirt shop, where the player can customize a graphic tee. Some of these designs have pretty bad designer isn't familiar with English syndrome. For example, Cocktailin' Me, This Where Waharta Is, Birthday Girl, I Dumped Do Lines, and Smet. The work options in this game are a coffee and bagel shop, a modeling agency, and a law office, each one increasing in amount of time required and the final payout. They must have finally realized that it doesn't make sense to have a place called Punk in Paris in a place that isn't Paris, and so now Crazy Topic is the only alt-fashion store, which is kind of a bummer. One notable difference in this game is that completing the daily outfit challenge gives you a small payout instead of being a just because kind of thing, giving you a little extra opportunity to earn more money per day. After this point, I pretty much stopped regularly visiting GirlsGoGames and only returned to play the games that I already knew that I liked, so the games after this point are unfamiliar territory for me. Next entry in the series is Shopaholic Models from November 2012. This one represents a pretty major turning point in the series, getting a visual revamp with different character models than we've seen in previous games, and with that, a completely new set of outfit items since the old ones no longer fit. It also seems like they've abandoned the Shopaholic versions of the GirlsGoGames mascots, Gwen, Grace, and Gabriella. And although you could argue that a few avatar options kind of resemble them, none are a very strong match except for this freckled blonde girl for Gabriella. These new character models are pretty okay, although I liked it better in the previous games when there was a darker and lighter deep complexion instead of only one. Also, all of these games have really bad hair texture diversity. There's very few repeat stores here in comparison to the previous games, although several of them serve similar purposes as their earlier counterparts. This game introduces the shops Glitterati and Elegance International for formal wear, Twinkle Toes for shoes, Kawaboom for Western-inspired looks, Cherry on Top for makeup, Luscious Locks for hair, RIP Devilish Hairdresser, Tattoo Style Shop, which marks the first time that tattoos are a customization option in one of these games, Heads Up for hats and head accessories, Princess of Darkness for emo and scene fashion, and Forever 17 and Bliss for more casual options. As well as another iteration of the Wheel of Fashion Fortune, this game introduced the Fashion Slot Machine, which can also unlock some items that you can't get anywhere else, but it has such a low payout rate that it just doesn't feel worthwhile unless you've cheated in a lot of money. More on that later. The job options in this game, in order of time commitment and payout, are a gym, a vitamin shop, and a photography studio. I think the fashion in this one is pretty elevated. There are a lot of avant-garde options in comparison to the previous games, and much of the outfit artwork is super unique and detailed. This game also uses a more robust system of unlockables to encourage players to engage with every aspect of the game, like working different jobs and playing both for longer stretches of time and more days in a row. This mostly serves the purpose of unlocking new backgrounds for the photography feature. This game also has an option to see a bird's eye view of the map and instantly teleport to any store, which is a nice little quality of life improvement. The store is also auto-advanced now. If Glitterati is on the right side of the screen and you click on that and exit, the neighboring store Twinkle Toes will be on the right side of the screen instead. So long as you're looking through the stores in order, this saves a bit of time. The biggest gripe that I have with this game is that so many of the options are always sold out, and the limited time sale events don't occur often enough to offset that. Also, the t-shirt store in this one is sadly lacking in confusing English text. Next up is Shopaholic Milan from March 2013. This one again has an all-new character appearance, although these ones are designed to be capable of fitting the clothing models from games that came before Shopaholic Models, so we have some more asset recycling in this game compared to the last one. While Shopaholic Models had some avatar options that could kinda sorta be interpreted to be Gwen, Grace, and Gabriella, this game makes it pretty clear that they just aren't using those characters anymore. And I know this is completely a matter of opinion, but I just do not care for the look of this redesign. There's something I just find unappealing about these avatars. The unique or new stores in this game include Florence Fashion for high-end department store type clothes, Summer Forever for short dresses and skirts, Lovely World for bags and accessories, Bling Bling for It's My Scene Life Bling Bling Bling, and my personal favorite, Red Carpet Legend for very formal gowns. Other than a handful of pretty new dresses, I think this game was kind of a step backward for the series, or at the very least the one that represents my personal tastes and the target audience's tastes starting to diverge. Like, this doesn't affect the gameplay in any major way, but I dislike the fact that every new clothing asset has sparkles. I just find it kind of tacky. It's one thing to have sparkles on things that are clearly meant to be glittery or sequined, like, it makes sense on these fancy gowns. But this is clearly some plain-ass fabric and it is sparkling like a disco ball. Like Shopaholic models, this game has a series of collectibles to unlock new backgrounds for the photo mode. But unlike models, and to this game's severe disadvantage, it pops up a new window every single time you get a new one. And this gets annoying very, very quickly. Not to mention, these windows are laggy in comparison with the rest of the game. I feel like it could just pop up a window the first time you unlock each one and then tick up the counter quietly in the background all of the rest of the times. Then there's Shopaholic Hollywood from September 2013. This one introduces some major new gameplay elements, and although it uses the character designs that I don't prefer to the other two, this one feels like probably the most robust game in the series so far. The game begins with a very railroady tutorial to explain to you how the party system works. Unlike the other games where you're just shopping for shopping's sake, this game gives you a series of events that have specific dress codes. Attending these parties increases your fame level, which unlocks more shopping areas. Certain stores are also time-locked, only opening a certain amount of days after you first create your save file. You only get one street of shops unlocked at the start, with 2 others that you unlock when you attain a specific fame level. The gameplay in this one feels more involved than what I've come to expect from this series. While the games before this one really only offered a few minutes of active gameplay per day, this one feels like you could sit and play with it for a while, at least until your money runs out. Another part that I appreciate is that this game uses 0 recycled clothing assets from the previous games. When there's too much overlap, it feels like there's not really much of a point to playing several of these games at once, but if you play this game, Shopaholic Models, and any one of the other location-based titles, the dress-up experience will be appreciably different with each one. The unlockables feel much more satisfying than the photo backgrounds of the previous games, and this game is also unique compared to the previous entries due to being able to customize your makeup, jewelry, and tattoos in this beauty salon for free, with certain items unlockable by spending your fame points. However, the downside of this party outfit gameplay loop is that there's a lot less incentive to make outfits that you think actually look nice. The appeal of a dress-up game with no specific objectives is that you can just make whatever you think looks good, and not just making a bunch of outfits that check the requirement boxes regardless of whether or not the items actually fit together. This one is also a bit excessively grindy. You have to play for way longer than I prefer to spend on a single flash game to unlock that 3rd shopping street, so that's a lot of content that you're missing out on if you don't grind the parties. I spent about 2.5 hours grinding to unlock everything that wasn't time-locked, and I only enjoyed about 15 minutes of that. Like, the final street unlocked definitely has some of the fanciest and most interesting pieces in the whole game, but at what cost? And once you achieve it, you feel like there's no point in spending any more time with this game, because there's nothing else to unlock by attending parties, and then you're like, wow, now I can do literally anything else. It also suffers from that issue that popped up in the previous games where too much of the available stock is sold out and locked behind those time-limited events. Easily the biggest issue that I ran into while playing this game is that the audio is just god-awful. Clicking wherever or going anywhere, doing anything, makes the sound glitch in a way that sounds like yanking off a strap of Velcro, making it extremely hard to tolerate playing this game with the sound on. The game that came after that, Shopaholic London from December 2013, follows the same formula, but instead of entire streets being blocked off by a level restriction, it's the specific shops instead. Forgive me if I'm too burnt out from the last game to get too deep into this one, because this new party-oriented gameplay loop gets old real quick. So once you have enough experience points to unlock one of these new shops, they're supposed to unlock in 24 hours. But unfortunately, there's an error in my game that changes that 24 hours to 54 years. Whoops! Unfortunately, that prevents me from accessing the majority of this game. Besides that, in terms of quality, it's basically identical to Hollywood, crunchy audio and everything. This one seems to use all original assets again. While the t-shirt shop is yet again full of unremarkable graphics, I think it's notable that the title screen features a phone box with the label Revergid and a bus en route to Etriuiupgetuyup. The next game, Shopaholic Beach Models from April 2014, carries on the pattern established by Shopaholic Hollywood and, Frankly, I kind of wish it didn't. The older games were simpler, yes, maybe you couldn't play them for so long at a stretch, but this new gameplay model just takes it too far in the opposite direction. However, this game does have a couple notable improvements, especially from the previous game, but also from both of the games so far that use this model. First, and most relievingly, I don't have to wait until I'm past the average American life expectancy to open these time-locked shops. The general gameplay is what I've come to expect from this late stage of the game series. There's a little additional quality of life feature in the fact that you can now sort clothes by style, which saves time that in previous games you'd spend trying to search for the icons manually. Although, in comparison to the last two games, this closet is a bit form over function. An interesting twist added in this game is that the job is no longer just a passive timer. This game integrates a little cooking game where you can run an ice cream stand, and it's simple but actually a little bit fun. You can serve 10 customers per day for a total additional $400. I think the shop designs are a bit lackluster in comparison to the last two games though, and I'm just not all that into beach-themed dress-up games because the thing about being at the beach is you don't really wear a lot of clothes, but I admit a lot of these are really quite pretty. And now it's 2015 and all of a sudden I can't find the flash files when I look at the Internet Archive captures. Uh-oh, we've switched to HTML5. This does not bode well. Now, I know as well as anyone that Flash isn't perfect, but what it is optimized for making games. HTML5 can do a lot of stuff very, very well, but in my opinion, games are not one of them unless handled by an expert in the medium with a whole lot of time on their hands. And the cheap cookie-cutter games that represent the typical quality of GirlsGoGames offerings are just not that. Well, let's try not to be too pessimistic and check out the first of the final 3 Shopaholic games. Next is Shopaholic Wedding Models from March 2015. Yeah, I have to admit, this one's just kind of a bummer. Like, the quality decline is obvious just from the first moment. Just look how crispy, crunchy these character avatars look. The stores are so static and joyless to interact with compared to the precedent set earlier in the series. It's really just one step more advanced than those menus that we got in the earlier games. It's clunky, it's rigid, there's so few stores, the jobs are back to being a lousy timer again, that dumb, grindy party mechanic is still the centerpiece of the gameplay, but this time there isn't that convenient style type filter. This one is just such a step backward. One of these stores doesn't even load, Jesus Christ! Up until now, these games have had a steady progression of trending better and better and better, and now it's just crashed down back to about the quality of the first release. Hey, at least there's a devilish hairdresser replacement here. Angle and devil. Shopaholic Tokyo from June 2015 is in a similarly bad way. Dear God, just look at that loop seam on the ground and in the sky. It looks awful. I was kind of looking forward to this one because I thought they could do so much with Japanese alternative and traditional fashion, but I just feel underwhelmed. A lot of it feels more anime-inspired than real-life fashion-inspired, which I just don't find as compelling. This game's saving grace is a Miku outfit, but I really just can't bring myself to engage with these for too long. And the last of the trifecta of disappointment is Shopaholic Rio from November 2015. This one's the final game in the series, and what do you think? What do you think the game is like? Do you think it got better? You think they learned how to implement more of the features they introduced in the previous games? No, they did not. But hey, at least it's Brazil time! This one has a particularly disjointed stylistic theme in comparison to the other HTML5 Shopaholic games, making it kind of difficult to assemble an outfit with the available options. God damn it, why does the background have seams? Again! I'm giving up on this. These last 3 games are the only games still actively hosted on GirlsGoGames, which is such a shame because I would never recommend them to anybody. They're graphically so much worse, the controls are worse, the layout is worse, even things that can't be directly attributed to the switch to HTML5 are just worse. And I swear to God, I'm not just being a hater with my nostalgia goggles on. I haven't played more than half of these before I made this video, and I could still acknowledge that they were getting better and better up until these. They're just a genuinely bad gameplay experience in comparison to its Flash counterparts. Like, I guess this is better than your standard click and drop dress-up game, but next to the others in the series, it's just nothing. In 2012, the Shopaholic World app debuted. This bundled all of the Shopaholic games that had been released at the time together, in a package slightly simplified for the iPad babies. This app has been removed from most app stores, including Apple and the Google Play Store, but hey, good news for Kindle users. For some reason, this game is still downloadable on the Amazon App Store. Why? God knows, I assume they just forgot it was there. Anyways, you can still find this app without having an Amazon tablet. I found an APK file for it and ran it with the application BlueStacks. This game updated over the course of its run to include the location-based games that were added to the Shopaholics canon. The version I found includes Paris, Christmas, redesignated to the North Pole for this game, Hawaii, New York, Hollywood, Milan, Tokyo, and Rio. So none of the games under the Models umbrella and no London. Spil Games said the British. It's actually kind of nice to play the later games in the classic Shopaholic format, with the simple menu-based shops and no pressure to do those party events. And especially those HTML5 games, the versions of them added to the app play way better than the actual browser games. And hey, now I can actually be Miku! I don't know if it's just because the app is deprecated or if it's really that cagey about the prices that it used for its microtransactions, but when I go to the Buy More Coins screen, it just doesn't tell me how much each of the packages are. And the only barrier for being able to access the microtransaction menu is to do a simple math problem, so anyone who's old enough to add or subtract or use a calculator would be able to get to this. All in all, I think this was a perfectly fine adaptation of the Flash games. I'm glad that it didn't introduce a premium currency like diamonds or something that allowed you to buy the fanciest items, because they easily could have. Having any microtransactions at all in a game targeted at young kids I think is shady, but at least it's not anything that couldn't be accomplished by returning every day. The other Shopaholic app was called Shopaholic 2, and this one's a bit of an oddball. It doesn't resemble the art styles used in any of the games. It's kind of just plain weird looking. To be honest, my player character looks like Lamely. And what did I just say about being glad that there wasn't a stupid additional currency like diamonds? Well, at the very least, the diamonds aren't a premium currency. You can only buy the currency that you use to buy clothes. But man, you start out with so many of these stores locked, and you have to spend diamonds to get them open. This one uses the party gameplay system like the latest Shopaholic Flash games, and attending parties is how you make diamonds. Other than its appearance, it's fundamentally similar to a later Shopaholic browser release, with the exception of that annoying shop unlocking mechanic. So, a train of thought I had while researching this is, hey, what if I don't want to grind on these games for an entire week or longer? Can I just give myself some more money? And the answer is yes, and surprisingly easily. Tutorial time! How to give yourself $1 million in the Shopaholic games, among other things that you can do by editing the save files. The absolute easiest way to do this is to use a game running with Ruffle, because all you need to do is right-click to find the save data, but it's also possible to do without Ruffle, including with Flashpoint. I'll put a link in the description for where you can find the save data for any of the Flashpoint games, which will be the same if you're running Flash Player directly as well. An important first step is to open up and do whatever it requires to actually make some save data on your computer. For the Shopaholic games, this means you need to create a player character. Not all Flash games create save data, and so this is only going to work on games that don't reset every time you refresh the page. So the save data for Flash games is stored in the form of an SOL file, and the best tool for editing this type of file is called Minerva, which conveniently runs in browser with no download necessary, although you can install the legacy versions to ensure that you can keep using this utility even if the website goes down. For a game running with Ruffle, including any Flash games that you find on the Internet Archive, you just right-click and go to the Save Manager and hit Download on the file that has the name of the game that you'd like to alter. Then you go to Minerva, hit Open, and select the file that you just downloaded. This will bring up a list of all the editable variables involved in the game. Sometimes these are nested in closed submenus, so if there's a little triangle next to them on the list, click them to see what's inside. I recommend keeping a backup of the original save just in case you mess something up, but you can mess around with changing anything in the file just to see what it does. For the Shopaholic games, you're probably going to be most interested in the variables labeled with money, like total money and today money, which describes your overall balance and your daily allowance respectively. Now, changing these values is an easy way to pretty much ruin the game for yourself, but if you'd prefer your Shopaholic experience to be encapsulated in a single afternoon rather than a series of several days, this might be worth checking out. After you're done editing the values, you just hit save and then go back to the tab where you're running Ruffle and click replace on the relevant save file to upload the edited file. You'll be forced to reload the page and then voila, instant millionaire status. For games running with Flashpoint, just refer to that link in the description for the file location, and you'll just have to manually find and replace the SOL files instead of using Ruffle's Save Manager. Something that I find peculiar about this series of games is the sheer lack of copycats. Flash games and plagiarism go hand in hand. Basically, anytime a game is a hit, you can find dozens or even hundreds of obvious copies. Take all the office kissing and school flirting game bootlegs, some of which are clearly just the original game's code with the assets replaced. But the Shopaholic games? I have never seen this format replicated. My best guess is that these are just too complicated to recreate. I suppose there's a chance that Spil Games was protective of this property and unexisted any knockoffs, but I feel like it's more likely that these games were just too large, too involved, it was too difficult and time-consuming to set up the local saves and time-sensitive features that the Shopaholics did. If asset flippers wanted to make a quick buck off of someone else's IP, they'd probably just make Pregnant Elsa dress-up game number 3,000,052 instead of trying to tackle the relatively huge project that a Shopaholic knockoff would be. I'm a little disappointed because I was hoping there'd be a bunch of bootlegs with crappy art and crappier gameplay, but no, I couldn't actually find any. I only found one that resembles the Shopaholic games at all, and only in title and environment, and not at all in gameplay. This one's called Sunshine Shopaholic. You run around the side-scrolling street that resembles the Shopaholic overworlds and try to collect the items that appear on the ground, while trying to avoid the strange man who is aggressively pursuing you. And yes, this is as creepy as it sounds. He moves so fast, way faster than the player character, and the game immediately ends if he catches you. But he's been easy enough to avoid so far. Oh my god! Oh my god, he's right behind me! So I have a lot of nostalgic fondness for this series, but are the Shopaholic games actually a positive experience for its players? My knee-jerk reaction to that question is yes, of course, especially in comparison to some other things on the internet that expose me to inappropriate or dangerous interactions. Watch my video about the MMO tab on GirlsGoGames for more information about that. Compared to that, the Shopaholic games were basically flawless. But it's a little more complicated than that. An important question to consider with games for young people is, what is this teaching the audience? When it comes to Flash games, the answer is often not much, or it feels good when number goes up. Most Flash dress-up games basically convey, it's fun to play dress-up, without much more depth. But the Shopaholic games go a few steps beyond that, both in a positive and negative direction. The most obvious positive learning aspect in the Shopaholic games is the budgeting and math lessons embedded in the gameplay. You have to have a grasp on subtraction to understand how much money you're spending and how much purchasing power you have. And it also teaches some basic financial principles like taking advantage of discounts instead of buying things impulsively, budgeting and saving for expensive purchases, and making effective cost-benefit analyses. However, I think there's a prominent negative lesson in this game, and that goes hand in hand with its more positive educational aspects. That is the glorification of the act of shopping and, more pressingly, shopping addiction. The positive spin on shopping addiction becomes apparent with its name alone, Shopaholic. This term has been cutesy and flippant basically from the moment of its conception, which really minimizes how much harm it can cause in real life. The suffix holic derives from the word alcoholic, but rarely is shopping addiction treated with the same gravity that's usually associated with alcoholism. In reality, shopping addiction in its most severe form is something that can be truly life-ruining. It can destroy families, it can lead to homelessness, it's highly comorbid with other mental illnesses like depression and OCD. But most of the time when you see shopping addiction portrayed in media, it's something cute and non-serious, aspirational even. There are a few distinct reasons why shopping addiction is ignored, minimized, and cutesified. First of all, when a society prioritizes profit above everything, including the well-being of its people, you're going to see a lot of behavior that sacrifices basically every aspect of human welfare for the sake of profit. Therefore, companies are incentivized to send the message, shopping will make you feel better no matter what. And this is so pervasive that it's even repeated by companies that don't stand to make a direct profit from this attitude, like the digital-only Spil Games. Another reason is that having the means to sustain a shopping addiction is a status symbol. To be able to go and blow thousands of dollars on clothes anytime you feel a slight negative emotion is a sign of being part of a high socioeconomic class. And so even people who don't really have the means are drawn to behave like this anyways. It's the same reason that people get expensive sports cars that end up repossessed, or buying designer bags that they end up not being able to pay off. For many, the appearance of being rich is more important than actually being rich. Shopping addiction is so thoroughly normalized that studies have largely failed to determine what percentage of the population is affected because it's hard to draw the line where the disordered behavior starts and the socially accepted obsession with shopping ends. With that being said, there's a similarly vague line to be drawn that separates media that glorifies shopping addiction and media that just responds to its pre-existing role in culture. While this game does make light of materialism and problematic shopping habits, it also does so about as benignly as possible. The fact is, most kids clicking on this game aren't going to learn to glamorize shopping just because they played this game. They're coming into it already thinking it's an aspirational activity. And it's also hugely in this game's favor that it's free. The fact that there's no class barrier built into these games means that any player with access to a computer can enjoy it to the fullest. And this could be extra rewarding for players who don't have the means to go shopping regularly. So with that being said, the Shopaholic games do encourage some unhealthy attitudes towards shopping, but mostly just because they're a product of a culture that has an unhealthy relationship with shopping. Beyond the educational and social implications of these games, is the gameplay a healthy experience for kids? The website Dark Pattern Games goes in depth into addictive, deceptive, and overall unhealthy gaming practices, especially the ones that appear on mobile games. To get a better look at the potential negative effects of this type of game, I'm going to be comparing the features of the Shopaholic games to the dark patterns listed on this site. An important factor to consider with this list is that just because a game includes a few of these items doesn't categorize it as dark automatically. A game that includes a couple of these items can be perfectly benign. You could even argue that it's necessary for a game to include at least a few of these factors, or else players wouldn't have enough incentive to return to it, even if the gameplay is fun on its own merit. All of these factors need to be considered together to get a picture of how heavily the game relies on addiction, fallacious reasoning, and other tricks that come at the expense of the player. The category monetary dark patterns is the easiest with the Shopaholic series of games, because in regards to the browser-based flash games that make up the core of the series, every one of these is completely inapplicable due to the game having no microtransactions and being completely free to play. The only exception would be the Shopaholic Apps, which allow you to buy more currency, which means the app version only checks the pay-to-win box. The other irrelevant category is social dark patterns, which doesn't apply here because these are single-player games, and even the way they were integrated into GirlsGoGames' social media phase doesn't apply to any of the items on this list. Psychological dark patterns are where things start becoming potentially applicable to the Shopaholic series, so let's look over them one by one. First is invested/endowed value, which is basically the gaming version of the sunk cost fallacy. As in, you've already spent so much time playing this game, it feels like it would all be for nothing if you stop now. I'm going to say that this doesn't apply to most of the Shopaholic games, because although you're encouraged to return daily, players wouldn't really feel a huge sense of loss if they stopped or took a break, because it's not all that hard to progress in the first place. However, with the later games that become a bit more grindy and unlock focused, this pattern starts to apply a little bit. Next is badges/endowed progress, or collectible achievements that create an artificial gameplay goal for the sake of completionism, even if that doesn't correspond to a better gameplay experience. This applies to most of these games, more so the later ones, but all of the ones that contain some unlockables. While the endowed progress for many of the earlier games is pretty insignificant, the achievements and fame level barriers could definitely tempt players to keep playing past the point where they've stopped having fun. Next is complete the collection, or rewarding completionism. I'd say this one is completely inapplicable to Shopaholic Paris with its lack of collectibles and tiny inventory size, but it becomes more relevant as the series progressed, especially after the party gameplay loop was introduced. You're encouraged to have as many colors and styles in your closet as possible, and although I'm not positive whether these games ever gained an inventory size that would allow you to collect every possible item, this pattern still mildly applies. Then there's illusion of control, represented by games that covertly change mechanics so that players feel like they're accomplishing more than they actually are. Fortunately, the gameplay mechanics of Shopaholics are straightforward enough to make it clear that this one doesn't apply. Then there's variable rewards, which trigger addiction more easily than a predictable schedule of rewards. This one's a slight yes because you don't have control over how much allowance you get per day, and also the money bags you can find laying on the street are variable in their payout too. However, compared to a properly dark utilization of this pattern, like coaxing users to blow a ton of money on a gacha, this one is very mild. Next is aesthetic manipulations, which I think is best characterized by those moments in Episode and similar apps where the game is like, so do you want to go to this party in this shitty stained doo-doo dress? For free. Or this gorgeous sexy designer cocktail dress, 20 diamonds. I think this one only applies in the most benign sense where it's like, if you show up every day you can get all the fancy items. But if you don't, then you can't. It doesn't exactly feel like extortion. Last one from this category is the optimism or frequency bias, which again does not apply here. I have saved the most relevant category for last, and that is temporal dark patterns. Playing by appointment. Guilty in every game. You won't be able to complete your collection unless you wait for the minute-long sale windows that randomly pop up that allow you to buy those limited time items. Daily rewards. That's basically the game's entire gimmick. It is literally designed to get you to come back to GirlsGoGames every single day. Grinding, that's applicable to games that use that party gameplay mechanic, because that's a lot of repetitive, boring tasks to be able to advance the game. Advertisements and can't pause or save aren't applicable here, but infinite treadmill, meaning that the game will never be complete, gets more relevant the later you get in the series. You could argue that the game is complete after you bought as many items as you can, but the game is never going to serve up a win screen. Finally, there's wait to play, which shows up in the majority of the jobs, and the fact that you need to wait around for those random limited time events. So that's 5 of 7 temporal dark patterns utilized, and clearly the most psychologically negative aspect of this game. You could argue, don't most games use some of these temporal patterns? And, well, yes, they do. However, games use these patterns because the inherent enjoyability of the gameplay isn't enough to have players coming back consistently. So these dark patterns create an artificial pressure for players to keep returning to the game, and therefore generating more ad and microtransaction revenue through the publishers. But is this enough for the games to qualify as dark? I would say no. The fact that the other categories are completely irrelevant or only vaguely apply is a good sign. If the worst that can be said for it is that it's kind of a time suck, then that's really not so bad. So I think that this game formula is underutilized, and I'd like to finish out this video with my dream Shopaholic game. First of all, we've got to accept it, Flash is dead, it ripped in peace, and HTML5 just kind of sucks as a game design medium. So we're gonna make this a traditional PC and console game instead. Not an app, because an app would almost certainly have microtransactions, and microtransactions suck. But since my dream Shopaholic game would be too expansive to be free to play, I'm thinking there would be a one-time payment of like $20 to $40 depending on how many hours the average player gets out of it. Now the big question is 2D or 3D? My instinct tells me that it should be 2D because I prefer the look of 2D. A nice thing about 3D models is that they can be reshaped to fit different body types. But with 2D clothing assets, you basically have to redraw them from scratch for every single type. Either that or making the clothes simple enough to avoid that, which is why most 2D dress-up games only offer one body type. Ideally, this game would be both body type and gender inclusive, so I think 3D is probably going to be the most feasible way to achieve that. If the size differences in the outfit items could be automated, I think there could be a lot of body type variability, but if each item has to be resized manually, it would probably be more like thin, middle, and large. I'd want this game to have a more typical character creator instead of limiting you to the small amount of avatars found in the Flash games. Maybe you could start out with more naturalistic and simple colors and hairstyles, and unlock or buy the more outlandish ones. So there'd be a masculine and a feminine avatar option, and most importantly, 0 gendered clothing restriction. Looking at you, fashion dreamer. However, the clothing variety would generally be pretty feminine leaning, because this is a fashion game and there doesn't need to be 100 suits to correspond to every 100 dresses. If you're choosing to spend your time playing a fashion game in the first place, you're probably not going to be too upset about putting your player avatar in a dress. I think the multiple locations used in the Shopaholic World app would be the ideal way to execute this. You could start with like 2 or 3 locations and then unlock more as you spend money. Since this would be a game that you actually pay money for, there would need to be a way to continue playing for longer than it takes to spend your allowance. So I'm thinking multiple jobs with corresponding minigames that don't have a daily limit. Kind of like the ice cream shop from the Beach Models game, except you can keep going after 10 customers. And the most important aspect that would make this my dream Shopaholic game, the fashion variety. I want all kinds of alt fashions. Of course, there should be the ones that were already included in the originals, like punk, emo scene, what have you, but also some proper goth fashion, J-fashion subcultures like Lolita, Decora, Yaru, and others. I want rave fits, I want streetwear and vintage, and basically any fashion subtype that you can imagine, with additional emphasis put on the more experimental and interesting ones. I don't know, I just feel like we don't need another dress-up game that appears to have been mostly supplied by American Eagle, but I want thousands of dress-up items with an equally huge item limit. Item customization would be great, but it's also not strictly necessary. Lastly, I think there should be some NPC interaction. Maybe even sneak a dating sim in there, why not? Thank you all for sticking with me. As always, the best way to support me is by subscribing to my Patreon. I'm still working on that video that I promised at the end of my last upload because burnout does that to you sometimes. But regardless, if you like the things that I make, becoming a patron is the best way to ensure that I can keep doing this on a regular basis. Thank you so much to Cheyenne, Con, Dr. Dreamerella, Fishcatch, Grizzly, Julia, Luca Anastasius, Ms. Goat, Nicole Manassian, and Tara Tara. Okay, bye. Okay, for total transparency, Smet is a brand by Christian Audigier, the same designer as Ed Hardy, and this Smet on the t-shirt is a one-to-one ripoff of the actual logo. I'm mentioning this now because I feel like I shouldn't omit it, but it's placed after most people have already clicked off the video because, well, I just kind of think it's funnier without the context. And I still have no idea what Smet means. I'm kind of disappointed because I was kind of hoping to sell Smet merch, but that would not be legally feasible.